Welcome everyone to the CRM MVP podcast episode number 93. This is an interesting one because, I've been working with the community for before I became an MVP since 2010, 2011. I guess I got my MVP award in 2012. And the first event, I remember I got my MVP award in July of 2012. The first event that I went to as an MVP was the CRMUG Summit in Seattle in 2012, and I think we had like 300 people in that event. It was a pretty small event, but I was super excited about it because it was, again, my first one as an MVP, and also after attending Convergence, which was such a big event. Now I got to kind of experience a smaller event where everyone was a user, not really so much looking to buy a CRM system, but everyone was there to learn from each other. I really enjoyed that. And it was my first CRMUG summit, but it was also Tony Stein's first CRMUG summit. Tony, welcome to the show.
Good to hear from you, Gus. How you doing?
Good, good. And also Heather Williams is joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Heather. When was your first CRMUG summit or summit that you attended?
So I was around when they created CRMUG. So I
Oh,
started
wow.
back when it was just AXUG. We didn't even have, or they didn't even have GPUG. Yeah. So
Back in the day.
back in the day, I know we need some music to go with that.
That's awesome. And you guys have been again around for a long time with Dynamic Communities, the company that put together the summit and some of the other events, and also who was kind of leading the charge on the local user groups, which I thought it was a great idea. Having companies that are on the same city or the same region or whatever get together and kind of learn from each other, lessons learned and all of that. I really like that idea. But the company just kept growing and growing and growing. And I think that, we saw it blow up probably when Microsoft decided to stop convergence. So I wanted to talk to you guys about dynamic communities. That's what this episode is about. I think that we've seen that with COVID, and the rise of some of these local free events as well, that the size of dynamic communities and the reach of dynamic communities has decreased tremendously, right? We've seen a lot of people that used to work there now working for other companies like you two. And, I think that a lot of our listeners want to know what happened, what's going on over there, where are they going? Are we expecting to see summits in the future? Like for a lot of people, these were their favorite events, including myself. I love going to the user group summit, so I wanted to get your perspective in it, from it. And I know that you have been removed for a few months, but at least getting a little bit of clarity on that. But let's start talking from the beginning. So can you talk about how the summit started and kind of the growth, especially when the whole ending of convergence happened?
I'll start in on that, Heather, a little bit because I think it's funny, Gus. You brought up Seattle 2012, and this was right when I first started with the user group communities after spending about 10 years with Microsoft doing stuff in channel development or partner development roles on CRM version 1.2, 3.0, 4.0, all those things. And then I remember my last year at Microsoft in 2010, I remember seeing these little UG things pop up in some email correspondence and items that would come from time to time. And really what was happening was the evolution of community with business applications. And I think that was something that the founder of Dynamic Communities, Andy Hafer, had a great vision on. He was an AX user himself using Exapta, and everyone in the community kind of knows his story about, hey, I'm struggling with deploying Exapta. How do I roll this out better? Blah, blah, blah. And it was just a great testament to saying, hey, there's a lot of power in the customer voice. If people come together to connect, learn, and share, great things can happen. And that really started to ring true for the other applications as they started to formulate a little bit because Microsoft was evolving the product and there was so much of the element of convergence that was focused on what's new, what's exciting, where are we going? But here there's thousands of customers stuck with what's in their pocket today, or what are they using now, or what's a feature they had last year that they still haven't fully mastered today. And those were the things that people like Heather and I and others were bringing to the table, working with those community members to truly understand where they were at with business applications, where were they stuck, What kind of content did they need to foster that? And there was no one really doing community back then. There were some, age-old discussion forums and things that were happening,
Right.
but nobody was really organizing discussions and meetings. And dynamic communities came along and had a fantastic vision for saying we need to foster this from the ground up. For user, from user was the mantra. And so people started organizing local meetings. And where CRMUG, Gus, as we fell in love with, where they really kind of took off, was a great relationship with Microsoft in organizing local chapter meetings, local user groups, getting kind of, we were subsidized a little bit by getting some funding to buy some, buy some Subway sandwiches or whatever we could do to get people to congregate and come together to connect, learn, and share on the mission. And so we would do that across all these cities across the United States first, and then it spent, it went over in Canada with Rick McCutcheon and others, and it went to Europe and so forth. And these localized meetings evolved those customer discussions into the event. And then the event started, right? The event was a marquee thing, but that was really a byproduct, I think, of all the goodwill and the great things happening day in and day out throughout the user group community. And
Right.
so as that continued to grow from kind of the 2010 timeframe on all the way up until the last few years, where I think the community is starting to look at things is saying, look, there's a lot of great tools out there. There's a lot of great people. The business application space and others are getting so large, and there's many, many others that can participate in this. And there's ways to do that. That's different. There's different applications people are up against. There's better ways to congregate. There's different tools. And I just think what we're starting to see is an evolution of community that's happening where customers and partners and others have a choice of how they want to participate. And the good news is for all customers and partners and even Microsoft is that there's still a tremendous community out there. It's just, it may be fragmented now. There just might be more options to decide where I want to spend time and why. And that's a decision everyone's going to have to make on where do they go from here or what happens. And I've not being part of the community directly now that I work back with Microsoft doing stuff on the Azure team. So I'm kind of disconnected from the business applications community a little bit, but I still think there could be a marquee event. I still think there will be elements like that, but I think you might see other entities and others doing those. There could be a lot of options
Yeah.
for people to participate.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that there was a gap, and there's still a gap in the community. I think that back then, I was answering a ton of questions on the Microsoft community. Microsoft has their own community, but I think that because it was ran by Microsoft, the customers that went into that community were customers that had issues, essentially. Like, I'm struggling with this. I'm trying to make this happen. Help me out. It wasn't really a discussion about, let me show you how I'm using this feature. Let me show you the lessons I learned by doing this migration, or, this upgrade, or whatever it was. It wasn't so much about sharing the best practices and experience as more as
Right.
it was, let me get some help. And I think that's where the community stepped in. But from the beginning, I don't think Microsoft was very interested in sharing, like, what, when users came in and said, I know that that's a cool feature, I know that it's coming, I like that, but how about you teach me to use the stuff I already bought? I don't think Microsoft was really interested on that. And I think even during convergence, I think you were responsible for delivering like the last day or 2 days of content, right?
Yeah, yeah. There was the pre-day. There were a couple of community days beforehand or afterwards that we partnered very closely with the Convergence director that ran that. Her name was Heather Kula, and she ran that event for 20 years, growing it from what was Great Plains
Wow.
Software into what it was. And ironically, Heather Kula had joined the organization here at Dynamic Communities in the kind of 2015-16 timeframe when they decided to kind of change the event landscape up altogether at Microsoft. So here we had someone with 20 plus years of biz apps experience and others, and she kind of got behind the curtains and helped us organize our marquee events for Summit and so forth, and the other event things that the community was trying to do. I don't know, Heather, what's your perspective on some of that as well with the rise of community through some of this? You've seen it on the ERP side as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of where I was born and raised, and it's where I kind of stuck around. And I worked and kind of grew up with Frank Vukovitz, who was in the early parts of creating AXUG along with Andy. in the early days. So, you were spot on. And it all started with a ground up mission of just kind of this wanting to help everybody kind of go through something that's pretty tough in as best way they could. And know that they were doing it with a group of people that had no vested interest in like selling them anything. I mean, it was just a group of customers just trying to lift everyone up. And in turn, it ended up getting a good audience from Microsoft, or a good recognition from Microsoft. And then they wanted to kind of use the user group as a sounding board and committees, and it just ended up being this wonderful, good kumbaya moment, right? Where partners were giving education and MVPs were giving their education and customers were eating it up and consuming it. And then they were then getting advocacy with Microsoft. And it was all for the mission of just this, having the users be the center of attention, and the whole mission was driven by them. So, and to the point about Summit, will there ever be one? I mean, I think what we have all learned is that community can't be owned. I learned that, and it was a hard lesson, right? Because I just thought, gosh, community was just all of us, and all of the things that we were doing and being a part of, and at all of the events. And Gus, I'm sure you felt that too. It was like community was when you were at Summit and all of the users and talking, and that was what you would call that. And then eventually, I think we've all seen that community is what you make it. Community is a Saturday event. Community is anybody that gathers people together to just learn and talk. And you can't just say you own community. It's really, so I think that's the
Yeah.
long lesson. And so who will own a community summit? Well, my gosh, it probably will be quite a few people.
Mhm.
I mean, all of you MVPs have had a great start with your Saturdays. I've been watching. You have Saturdays that are still going. You have Scottish Summit. You have people that are doing amazing things in community, have been for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And they're just going to shine a little brighter right now. So that's kind of my
Yeah, I
take on
think
it.
so. I mean, I think, like you said, I don't think the need of learning from each other and all of that is going away. But who will dominate that space is yet to be seen. I mean, I think that obviously the summit is something that grew over time into a large event, but you have these local events, as you mentioned, the Dynamics 365 Saturday events, or the Scottish Summit is a good example. I was there this year and it was over 1,000 people. Like it's really, really massive what a couple of MVPs in a city can put together if they really focus on stuff. And I think that those local events present the opportunity for like if you're in the UK, you can go to the Scottish Summit a lot easier than going to the event in Orlando, for example, or Nashville, right? So having these local events is really a huge advantage, but those events only happen once a year and is one day of the year. What about the other 364 days? Like, people still need to connect and stuff, and I don't think any of these free events are having any community or any forum out there where people can still collaborate and stuff. I still think that's a massive gap, and someone needs to fill that.
Yeah, and to be objective a little bit, just one thing that I foresee as a challenge for community to continue to exist, and that is exist in the right way, and that is make sure you're including the customer voice. Um, Truth be told, I always thought that was one place where dynamic communities really thrived, and how we were an independent voice. We were customers ourselves. We weren't implementation consultants. We don't do those things. We weren't actually delivering the training we did. We contracted that out with MVPs and other trainers and so forth. So we were never competing for the attention of a customer to earn their services business. That was never the intent of the user group community. And I think that's something that will be interesting to see how people navigate that, because there's a lot of interested people out there that are spinning up these one-off events, but there's everyone doing that are implementation providers, or they're MVPs, or they're people looking for services contracts and things. And one thing that I think will be interesting is to see community can exist, but it's got to be more than just a bunch of techies getting together and partners that just want to talk about, the technology aspects of what's coming and what's going. You really got to figure out a way how to include the customer voice, the real
Right.
people that are using the product day in and day out. And that's where the secret sauce is in community. And so that will be interesting to see how that unfolds in the future.
All right, so people really want to understand what happened because again, DCI seem to be ever growing, right? Every event was bigger than the previous year, and bigger and better. And I think that obviously part of it was that you guys were learning how to run them and getting better and better at it. And more people would tell another person to come by, and like there were always more and more people coming. But at some point, everything just started crashing down. I don't know if it all started when Andy decided to step out from being the CEO or the lead, I guess, at DCI. I think Janet was named the CEO at that point. I don't know if that's when things started to go down because he was focused on something else. I think that most people would say that it was because of COVID, and that's because of the timing. I feel that we had that US summit last year, which was in Orlando, and it seemed to go well, right? It was an event, and a lot of people showed up and all of that. Um, and then they would say, well, COVID showed up, and that's what took things down. But from your perspective, when do you see a shift on the company just growing, everything looking awesome, to, well, something changed?
Well, Heather, do you want to
Do
start
it.
on this one? You
I was
you
gonna
start on
say.
this one because there's not a I have perspective on it, but there's a lot of variables that played factors in so many things like this. But Heather could probably kind of pitch in and first.
So I think you're right. From the outside looking in, it just looked like everything was lining up and everything was running, swimmingly well. And I think underneath of the covers, a lot of things that were foundationally what made the user groups who they were, what they were in the beginning, were cracked. And as you know, when your foundation's cracked, everything that's built on top of it starts to just become rocky and shifty. And so while on the outside looking in, it looked amazing, there was just things that weren't, systems were old and antiquated. And, it's a community for technology. That's kind of unacceptable. Just the shift and where the attention was, and was it from an authentic place of the user concern, or was it from what Microsoft wanted or what partners wanted? That core reason of being as a community just became rocky. Membership was no longer a focus, and therefore it became not really a solid value. It became questionable. And so when, again, those were the foundational things of community. And when they became just not solid in their and what they were, it just kind of impacted everything. And eventually things just start to rear their ugly heads. They become something you can't cover up by an event when you can't have an event. So, I think that's really what started to happen. And then it was not enough preparation to be on the better end of that, to really be, I mean, you all know digital transformation was absolutely imperative to make it through this pandemic. I mean, you just couldn't. If you could not figure out a way to, not to use the most overword word right now in the business language, but pivot. If you could not figure out how to do that, our whole business was a face-to-face event, essentially. I mean, that is what paid the bills. And
Exactly.
when we could not deliver that, when there could not be a shift, it just exposed a lot of weaknesses. And that's my take on it. And again, I don't work at DCI today, and I don't owe them necessarily anything. So I can speak honestly. That's just my take on it, from my perspective. So.
Yeah, there's a lot I'd agree with Heather on that, Gus, and just the fact that I can tell you from my experience doing content and programs and working with teams that were fostering that, it was really amazing to see how much volunteer effort was going on throughout the user group communities. And what I mean by that is it's really to people like you and to other MVPs and partners and customers that were speaking and sharing. We got to a point last year within the program team or element of dynamic communities in 2018 and 19, because I was working closely on the leadership side of that with a bunch of teams. we were producing at one point at over 3,000 different sessions of content and material and things that we were procuring in a given year from all the volunteers across the globe.
Wow.
Whether that was a session you did on a virtual webinar, or if you did it at an event. And the irony of that is that's just the team I was working with. Heather actually oversaw a team that did the local user groups. So just think about the 600 plus meetings that were happening globally as well, and all the session material and content. And I think a lot of the great people out there that still do a tremendous job of fostering goodwill, like an Andrew Bibby over in the UK, or a Sarah Critchley and a Rick McCutcheon, and all these people that do these things. There's so many wonderful things going on out there, but we got to a point where we were producing so much content and asking the community to kind of step up and go here, that the shift for me really started happening when the company started to look. We wanted to be more of an event-based business, and I think as much has been said by everybody in the community. I think Dynamic Community started focusing too much on being an event-based business and not enough about the community-based business. And I think that's where fundamentally you saw cracks in the foundation. And
Right.
obviously with COVID, it only accelerated the fact that it was very difficult for a business, and any business would have difficulty in that. And I think that's why you see so many displaced employees and so forth
Yeah.
this year, including myself. And, Heather left before that. But there's a lot of that's going on, and that's just the nature of business. So completely
Mm-hmm.
understandable.
And Gus, you brought up a great thing too. You said, a lot of MVPs were doing the Saturday events and stuff. And in all honesty, that was the moment in time to really take a look at how community was being done and to listen to what they were saying. They were saying, listen, you should have a free event. It should be free. People should gather for free. And that should have been the retake of, okay, this is how we need to figure out how to do revenue, and this is how we do community,
Right.
separating the two. And that
Well,
we just couldn't have done that better, or should have done
yeah.
that better.
I think that, so there were a couple things. I think that for some reason, I mean, DCI, Dynamic Communities, from the beginning, they were never a not for profit organization. It was always for profit. It was clear to me that, they were trying to make a profit while providing a ton of value. So I had no problem with that. But for some reason, I think when these Saturday events or free events started to happen, and people started seeing, okay, so I can go to this event who has a lot of the people speaking that also speak at your event, but this one is free to me, but you're charging me $1,500 to go to yours. Like, why? Like, why am I getting, charged for this? And the answer is, well, because unlike this event, which can happen at a local Microsoft office, that they can allow you to host the event for free and stuff, we have catering, we have all of these other expenses. And I think that there was a lot of fighting back and forth between DCI trying to justify that the events, you had to pay for them, versus these other ones that are free. And a lot of people were like, I'll just go to the free one. But like Tony said, that focus on just just being an event company, it's a problem, because events can be hosted anywhere by anyone. However, what happens in the other 364 days of the year, as I mentioned, is not something anyone is taking on, because that costs a lot of money and there's a lot of effort on having something like that.
Absolutely.
So so I I was thinking about when you were talking about like doing what Microsoft wants and all of that. I remember a conversation I had with Christy from Extreme, right? She was the owner of Extreme, an event that I personally loved attending. It was, to me, it was the opportunity to go and see and learn about things that were more, I guess, higher level technically than what you see at the UG Summit, which I have no problem with, and other people as well. It was always kind of said that the Extreme events were just a technical arm of the community. Let's just say a lot of the talks were level 300, level 400, etc., which you didn't really find a whole lot during the UG events. And one of the conversations that I was having with Christy, and like one of the evenings, I think the event was over at that point, was, she was telling me that in order to grow the event for next year, she would have to entertain a lot of Microsoft ideas, which again, Microsoft, they're coming from having an event like Convergence where they get to talk about the future and all of that, but the people attending Extreme, they really want to learn about how do you use what you currently have. Let's not talk about the future, but Microsoft is saying, well, in order for me to support you, either by sending our people so they can do keynotes and sessions and stuff, or either by giving you money, I don't know if that's the case, I'm just speculating, you have to talk about this future stuff. And Christie was pretty hesitant about that. And I think around the same time or the same year that we had that conversation, they ended up getting acquired by Dynamic Communities. And, I don't know how that worked out from your perspective. I think that, Christie was put in a really tough position that year, which was in order for this event to survive, I'm going to have to, agree to the demands from Microsoft, or else the event is not going to exist. And I think she ended up selling because of that. How did you see that merger from your perspective?
Well, I was fairly close to it, in part because I have a lot of respect for the Extreme event and what Christy started, and quite frankly, they were both coworkers of mine at Microsoft long ago, including John Verdon. John was at my wedding long ago. There's a big bull, little bull joke in there that he always gives me grief on, but it's kind of funny actually. But John and Christy did a great thing with the partner community, particularly across the CRM application space, because there really was no partner community events and so forth on the CRM CE side, like there was with directions and how that works for the Business Central and the Vision organizations across the globe.
Right.
And so it was interesting seeing it brought in, and because quite frankly, 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was seen as a competitive event, something competing with Summit, and how are we going to beat Christie, and how are we going to grow, and how are we going to get ahead of Extreme, and all that stuff. And it was kind of a frenemy type relationship with Extreme, and how we were collaborating with them on a couple things, but kind of wondering where they were. There was even a time in 2013 when we first tried to go to Europe. We had an event in Rome, and ironically, I think the Extreme event was happening in Rome at that year as well. And it was that same week we were trying to do kind of a local user group startup in Rome. And there was a bunch of us that, there not a bunch, there was literally like 4 people that flew over there for a 2 day, 3 day event at the Microsoft office in Rome. And I went over to the hotel where Christy and John were setting up for their event the week after. And I was helping them stuff boxes and working for them for 2 or 3 hours, just trying to get some insight as to what they were doing and why. And it was kind of a inquisitive
Nice.
hey, I'm going to spy on you a little bit. What are you guys doing for
Yeah.
partners that we should be doing? It's kind of a funny moment, but and I could tell Christy was always looking at me with curious eyes, and John was just shooting the BS with me like he always does, and it was a fun time. But yeah, and so I think the whole port. I think you're spot on with that, Gus. I think that was part of it, and you'll have to ask Christy on why she sold the business or what have you. But I do think that there was a grander vision for what community could be, and partners were a tremendous part of that, and always will be. And I think that was part of the vision for dynamic communities at one point, was how is the partner community going to be part of this? Because we all touch partners in some realm. If you're working with customers, whether you're on the user group side or at a different event, partners are one of the most critical elements of all of this. And there was a big vision for partners as part of dynamic communities and the kind of community we could foster for them and so forth. And we got mixed reviews about some of the things we were trying to do. And we were trying to iron those things out to see what could work and what couldn't work. And who knows, maybe that's still a piece of something that will be part of the future within the community at dynamic communities, but it's not for me to say, or I don't
Yeah.
even understand what the plan is. So, but that certainly could be.
Yeah, I think I wasn't as intimately involved with the part of the acquisition of Extreme with the communities, but I was involved with the understanding how like strategy wise where that was going to fit into the long term plan. And Tony's spot on where it was that time of considering growth into not just being so user focused with the education side. I want to be really clear with that. Not necessarily about the advocacy, but on the education side, but also thinking about, partners had to be certified and things like that. And could we help with partner readiness? And so Christie's Extreme organization fit really nicely into that. but yeah, I don't know her reason for selling. My reason for saying the part about Microsoft, and listen, I led a lot of groups that met with Microsoft, and Microsoft paid a lot of attention to a really good group of customers and members inside the user group, and have always been great to me and have always helped anytime I've ever needed. So I don't mean this in a negative sense, but what I mean is there's an element to dynamic communities that was super special in that they were just not pushed over by anybody at some point. Does that make sense? Like they weren't running things for
Right.
Microsoft. They weren't running things for partners. They were running things to make sure users had everything they needed. That was it. It didn't matter. Everything else didn't matter. And so Microsoft was just an element of it. It wasn't a dictator. And so anytime any of those things started to shift, that's what I mean by the foundation. Anytime those things started to shift, it made things rocky. It made things not make sense. And benefits started to be lost, value started to be lost. And so when you were saying, there were free events for the Saturday events, and so people are saying, why would I pay $1,500 for your event? That's where I feel like we started to fail as a community back then on proving value, because had it been very obvious, had we been moving in the direction that the community had been asking for and investing in the areas that they had been asking for, I don't think that would have been such a hard question for us to answer back then. Tony, do you? That's kind of how I feel about it. And I felt about it then, behind closed doors. Those were conversations we had. We needed to make obvious investments. That's the whole purpose of asking for money from events and membership and all of that, is to go back and say, look look at what has been, a blessing of your membership and of your registrations. Look at this great, fill in the blank, community, special interest group, all the free local user groups that were ran, all of those things, those all cost money. And so anyway, that was.
I could
So
tell you.
do you guys have any examples? I'm interested in hearing any examples of, for example, like, okay, I'm paying $1,500 and you want to say, yeah, but the free events can do this. Like, do you have any examples? Maybe they were shut down and they never happened, but something that you think that dynamic communities and those events could have done that the free events can't.
You want me to go?
Yeah, go ahead, Heather. I don't know how to comment on that. To be honest, I'll plead the fifth on that one.
I mean, well, look, back in the day when we were in the shoes of having to justify that, obviously we would say things and they were truths. I'm not saying we were saying untruths, but, there's manpower behind the scenes that are making the sessions. There's, cost in platforms. You all know that too. But most of MVPs are developers. They can do a lot of the things on their own that user groups couldn't. So there was all kinds of what you would, I guess, say hard costs, overhead. What was the sad part is that overhead just kind of ballooned and became not balanced. In the beginning,
Right.
you think about Summit, it was a $499 event. Eventually things became unbalanced. But what it had versus a free event, there were a lot of similarities. To your point, same set of experts, same type of topics. Maybe things didn't go as wide because there wasn't maybe as many rooms, or maybe free events had pizza but a paid event had coffee and bagels. I mean, really, at that point it's semantics. I think people were looking for a value, um, and the razzle dazzle became less important, um, and
Right.
it became about hard value. And when you got to compare it towards something that was free, it became harder to explain.
Yeah, my only color and commentary on this, and just to give you an example of one of the things that, and Gus, you would know this, I mean, because you got to know a lot of us. There's people like Heather and myself and others that were always representing the voice of the business application group we represented. And we were always bringing this feedback. How do we evolve? How do we change? And what made us really successful from 2010 to 2017 wasn't necessarily the same thing that will be successful now that there's other venues and ways to do things. And I think fundamentally it was becoming difficult for us to adjust, and we weren't adjusting fast enough to things that needed to change. And that's what excites me, a little bit about some of the narrative that I'm seeing from the new CEO at Dynamic Communities, and talking about the DAC technology. This was something that was brought up 3-4 years ago, and we were raising questions on it, saying this is really important to our constituencies. We got to think about better ways and how they can find and consume and index information as part of the user group sites, because we were very siloed in our UG approach. There were domains, CRMUG.com, AXUG.com, and there was a time and a place for all of that. And as we evolve into what business applications is becoming, there's a better way to deliver content and to deliver experiences for constituents in the concept of community. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how Dynamic Communities delivers against that model, the DAC model. We'll have to see if they deliver against it, but I absolutely think they're on the right track with that, because that's something we had been asking for on behalf of the constituency across the user groups for 4 years. And so those things definitely need to happen, and we'll have to see if it comes to fruition and if there's value there.
Yeah, I'm still kind of skeptical about this new move on the thing that was announced with the acceleration community. At least based on the description, like when I'm just reading this directly from their press release. It says DAC will create an entirely new opportunity for our users to have personalized and curated digital experiences, discuss and define issues, questions, and ideas on our forum message boards, and enable the opportunity for users around the world to publish blogs, podcasts, videos, and more to reach peers in the platform. Okay, that sounds cool, but like this is already out there. Like I'm not really sure where the value comes from. I think when we talked about it, Tony, a couple of years ago, I think it was in Nashville,
Hmm.
where you approached me and you said, we're trying to do something like this. Would you be interested in putting the CRM MVP podcast in there? And I
Yeah.
said absolutely, right. And we talked about. I think you talked about it on like one of the keynotes or something, right? Like it was happening.
Yeah, like there was a vision for all of this. It was just a matter of how do we get there. And I just, we weren't moving fast enough to get there, and it's taken a long time. So I really tip my hat to people that are left there, that are trying to make that happen, because it's something that like you said, there's always a reason to be skeptical. And some of the techies out there, like you and others and other developers that know software a lot better than I would, certainly will probably have opinions on what works and what doesn't work. But we're going to have to see if it provides great value for a constituency, because I could see the point of things. I mean, there was things that were happening that we just weren't able to deliver very well. We couldn't show. A great example of this is when Scott Duro called me, and we were executing against local user group meetings for something that was happening in the UK. If you lived in London and you're a Power Platform user and you were part of the Power Platform audience, um, if you're a CRMUG user on the 365 side of CE apps, if you registered for a meeting, but the Power Platform user groups were having a meeting on Power Apps, which is very relevant for you in the CE space maybe as well, people had no visibility to all these things because they were hosted in disparate and all these things. And so there was a lot of things that we needed to correct that hopefully DAC will bring to the table, for the constituency out there, because the users have been asking for that a long time. And that was always the number one role of the job that I was in and Heather Williams was in. And that was to listen to the community and do everything we can to ensure they have the best community experience possible. But they wanted to, people need to consume content or find meetings. They need to be able to recognize what's happening. If you live in London, what is all relevant in the biz app space that I need to be aware of. And we were not Dynamic Communities was not delivering against that in our old approach, because our old approach was fit for a model that was 10 years old. So it's really exciting to see where they're going to take it. Will they deliver against it and all those things? That will be interesting to see how it all unfolds. But I'm excited for the future of that if it happens.
Yeah, I mean, I understand kind of the goal for it. It's kind of curated information based on maybe, I don't know if there's any artificial intelligence behind it, where like depending on the articles you read and the things you visit, more things will be fed to you that you didn't even know they exist, but they kind of match your what you like to read about and what you like to learn about. So I get that, but if you think about like Facebook, for example, feeding you content that you might be interested on, or whatever it is, like all of those platforms are free. So I wonder if they're planning on adding this. I just don't know if a regular user who's just out there like, I don't even know what I want. I just want to learn to use my thing, my dynamics. I'm a brand new user. I don't know. Like, if you give me a selection, like, what are you interested on? I don't know what I want yet.
Yeah.
I just don't know if it would be attractive for organizations to pay for and sign up for something like this. I'm not sure.
That's right, because there's so many mediums that are out there now that hold the same content or have the ability to deliver it. And anybody now that can index anything on the web can find something relative on YouTube or other places. So really, where this, it depends on what the value of that content is, and that's something Heather and I know firsthand in all the work we've done over the years with our respective user groups, is that we were always trying to massage it and foster it from committees and from the voices of the users from the ground up, so that there was something unique, there was something different. There was going to be a roundtable discussion from 3 customers on something on working with business process flows that no one's seen yet or used, and like, how do you best use this? And those are things you typically don't see publicly being shared on YouTube videos or other things. So that was where I think having that user voice in the content approach can be a differentiating value prop for a community, but it takes work to do it. It takes a lot of massaging. You have to call customers. Sometimes you have to convince them. Like Zara Rudin, who's now working for Power Object. She was an end user. Gus, you remember Zara?
Yeah,
Um,
of course, of
Zara,
course.
and so she's living in Minneapolis now, but she was an end customer and she didn't want to share her experience working as a CRM administrator. But part of those success stories with people like Zara and others is what makes me excited. Same with Britta Scampton Rexted. Britta was a CRM admin at a small office down in the Twin Cities, and she evolved to be a CRM MVP, and she's got a tremendous voice, and she's got excellent knowledge, and she builds other people up. It takes work to get those people to do all of that,
Right.
and it depends on where that content value is. And the truth is, for all those people, like a Zara, like a Gus, like a Britta, all of those folks can now share all over the place. And that's where it will be interesting to see where community goes from here, because there's so many options out there for people to share. And heck, we have half of our 3 or 4 of our coworkers that worked with Heather and I working with Dynamics Con, which is another digital
Yeah.
event that people are raving about. So there's just a lot of things brewing out there for the purpose of community, which is good. I think it's great for the community because
Right.
they'll have options to see where they want to spend their time and why.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I noticed at the beginning, like let's say the first half of the last 10 years, I would say, is how open. Like, I remember we finished that summit in 2012 with us sitting like in a circle essentially at the Seattle Conference Center, and just talking about what can I do for next year. And you were very, very open minded about it. Like, just tell me, give me feedback. Like, I really
Yeah,
value
yeah,
this feedback. What do I want to do? But I feel that at some point that changed completely. Like, I feel that I would bring ideas, and many other people too. The MVPs we talk about, the UG and how to make it better and whatnot. And I felt like some of that just ignored. Like, I remember even talking to Rich Beliveau. We were talking, about ideas that a few years before that, when I brought up, for example, the black belt stuff, he was all over that. And then towards the end, I would bring stuff, and he's like, "Yeah, no, I don't think we can do that because that would make such and such mad." And we're already doing that on the Power App side, very similar. So I can't really do something like that. There was a lot of pushback, and I think that in this last year, a lot of people were really upset about the way DCI handled, for example, the events, that were canceled or suspended due to COVID, like the Barcelona one for the Europe summit, which I was supposed to go, by the way. I was already in Europe when they canceled it. Um, that I just feel that there is now a position, at least from the MVPs, and maybe not all MVPs, I don't want to generalize, but a lot of MVPs feel like the organization this year has turned kind of shady in a way. Like, there's a lot of lost in trust. Like, behind the scenes, the company as a whole would know things but withhold that information, for some reason. And in a lot of cases, the reason appears to be money related, right? We want more people to register, even though we know we're not running this Nashville event in person. There's absolutely no way we're going to do it, but we want more people to do it. So we'll say whatever we need to say in order to have more people register and get their core workers registered. And I mean, I don't want to put you guys in a spot because for some of that time you weren't even there, but how do you feel or respond to that perception that it seems to me that on the last year or so, the company, kind of lost trust with those of us who collaborate, with it and also with the users that attend the events?
Well, I'll speak for myself. I don't want to speak for Tony, but I responded by quitting. So that's how I responded. I didn't agree with it. And it still makes my heart race when I think about some of the things that happened. And, I don't want to come across like I'm angry because I've been told that I can come across angry about this. But I mean, there's this level of, for people like Tony and I, where our stance was with that community. There's other people like us. It wasn't just us. Bob McAdam, a stellar person in the GPUG community. Mark Rhodes, Rose was with the Power. You stand up there with some integrity and you want to be able to look people in the eye. And that was some ugly stuff. And I can't explain it. I simply can't explain it. And when I couldn't, I quit. So that's how I'll answer that one.
Do you think that some of that came after like some of the investments the dynamic community received? Because it's pretty public. It's all over the place. Companies like CSWC and TCP Group, like they invested millions and millions of dollars into DCI. I assume some of that is what was used to acquire Extreme and to expand into Australia and all these other places. But do you think that once, those companies got into the board, things shifted?
um, I mean, I'm sure I wasn't at the level of leadership that I had direct contact with TZP, but the way I understood it was that, to your point, it was an investment. Later, I've learned, and I'm not an investment person, so I don't really know, but I've learned that it was a purchase. They purchased DCI, it was sold. So I don't know how that shift things, but yes, I'm sure anytime that you're not being led by a sole owner who's leading with a mission that, they started something about a user for users by users, and you move to, you're expected to produce a set amount of profit on things. Absolutely. How could you say that wouldn't change things? That absolutely would
Right.
change things. And yeah, so I'm sure that had some impact on a lot of things that happen. And I'm sure that there were hard decisions to be made. Look, I am not saying that this was an easy time for anybody, including the people at DCI, having to make decisions. But I also will say they were the wrong ones. And I will say that they were the wrong ones. You don't just not give a refund. You just don't do that. Anybody in this world that would post a review for any merchant that we know that would say they didn't get a refund on something that they did not get as a purchase, we would all agree that was not right. So I don't think I'm saying anything that anyone else wouldn't if they could.
Right.
And Gus, I have to respectfully plead the fifth on this.
No, I understand. Um, so yeah, and again, just going back to the whole investment thing, this happened way before COVID. I'm reading about it in
Mm.
2018. That's when some of the investments started to happen again from these groups. I do find it interesting, like in some of these press releases. I think MS Dynamics World did a really good piece on this as well. They're talking about how it's kind of like strategic investment with these companies, and I mean these are private equity firms. Like I looked at one of them, TCP, who is heavily invested in dynamic communities still. They own 52 companies. Like how much how much attention are they, paying to dynamic communities and trying to help it? I don't know. It doesn't, it's like you said, it just seems like it was an acquisition and not so much we need this money to strategically grow or anything like that. I don't know if there was a plan behind it.
Yeah, I wasn't at
Um,
liberty to have those types of conversations or know that going in. A lot of what I know now is hindsight. It always
right.
is, right? When you reflect and you can sit back and think about things and conversations and just place it together. But, I can't speak on it because I wasn't in the room with those conversations. But I know I was in the room when there were conversations about what to do about Summit Europe and things like that, and refunds. And I can tell
I
you,
mean,
and oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I assume the attitude was like, absolutely no way we can give people their money back.
Well, I will say no more so. I'll say the attitude was, if the answer is you're not giving them the refund, it's absolutely the wrong thing. Like it was more like that. It was a group of people pleading, to do the right thing. But
So
yeah,
was that the last thing? Like when you said like, forget it, I just can't deal with this.
well, then finding out in emails to the community that the refund wasn't given, we weren't even,
Okay. So you so
it was just not handled well on all sides. I'll just say that, on all sides.
okay. So it was kind of up for debate, and then you just realized on an email that that wasn't gonna happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean and it's weird, like the messaging, also the clarity or the sincerity, I guess, of the message in some cases, like specifically about the US event, for example, where to some people behind closed doors, they were pretty open and say, look, we're gonna do this virtually, but then you would get an email the next day saying that no, we're still like I would get emails as a speaker saying, would you be willing to speak in person? And I'm like, look, I live 3 hours from Nashville. Yes, no problem. And I didn't say anything, but what I really wanted to say was like, but yesterday you said there's no chance we're holding this in person. So why are you asking me if we're gonna, if I'm cool speaking in person? I don't get it.
Hmm.
So I think there was a lot of disconnect on that, or I don't know if it was on purpose or not. But again, I think that that opinion that the company towards the end was really sketchy is very widespread amongst the MVPs and other speakers and all the users as well
Hmm. Yeah, I wasn't around for Nashville. I had left.
at
Um,
that point.
yeah, yeah. So I,
Yep,
Yeah.
and I was let go before that event happened, and it was a really, I can just comment that I know it's been a very challenging summer and spring for everybody, and certainly everybody there trying to execute an event where you hope to have it in person, but yet the hope was diminished when COVID just wouldn't release its anguish on the world, and so there's all this stuff that you're trying to fret up against, but yeah, it was very difficult, Gus, and that sentiment was similar to what Heather said. I remember Pablo Peralta telling me the same thing. Pablo had a good relationship with us and bringing the Latin American user groups with dynamic communities, and Pablo just had to call me one day and say I'm out, and I absolutely understand his sentiment and where he's coming from, and thankfully Pablo is doing great things for South America and Mexico and Spain right now, where he's got these tech marathon events going digitally and other things. So Pablo is certainly carrying the torch yet for Latin America and Spanish speaking user groups. But yeah, the same thing. He felt the same way as Heather did. So that was part of it.
Yeah, that was interesting. So when Andy stepped out a couple of years ago, was that because of the acquisition, or was it because it was a plan all along, or were you involved in that?
the timing aligned with the acquisition. Yeah. So it
uh
was I think the timing aligned that Janet was promoted to CEO, and
Interesting.
Andy kind of took a step aside, and um, yeah, that's
Okay.
how I recall it. I don't know, Tony, if you.
Nope, I have no comment on that. That was
Okay,
Yeah, the
that's how
timing
I
was right.
recall it. Yeah.
Last year during the summit in Orlando, I was surprised to learn that DCI had 120 or 125 employees. I didn't know it was that big. I was surprised. I mean, I figured that it would take, I don't know, a few dozen people to run those events, but I mean, over 100. I was pleasantly surprised.
I didn't
It
know it
seems
was
like,
over that. I think the most
yeah,
I ever knew was like 92, maybe. I don't know, Tony. Did it ever get higher than that?
It was to my understanding, Gus. Whenever I was there, and I've only been removed for a few months, but it was never at 100.
Yeah, I don't
oh,
think it
okay.
ever was.
Yeah, so I don't know if
Close,
that's
close,
that
like
could
low
be
90s.
MVP rumor mill getting out of control a little bit, but
Uh,
it was never over 100.
A little
no, that
inflation.
that was told to me by someone at DCI, someone pretty high up at DCI. But anyway, the point is, right now it seems like there's like 5 people there left. I don't know. What do you guys think needs to happen? and if there's anything that can happen for DCI to bounce back up and own the community. Do you think it's possible? And if so, what do you think needs to happen?
My 2 cents on this is I I I think the community should just pause. I mean, we're in the holiday season right now. Um, and there is, like Heather said earlier, there's no one that ever owns the community. But what I will say is that there are thousands, tens of thousands of wonderful people out there that are part of these user group communities, that are part of what is dynamic communities. And there are still so many great people out there with good intentions and goodwill and good intent that I think if everyone would just pause for a little bit and let this thing breathe and see if there's a chance that the DAC thing or decision acceleration thing comes to fruition, and if there's ways that the economy and that the world can get back on track, and if there's a marquee event next year that seems compelling and interesting, I certainly hope people wouldn't lose sight of the fact that just because some of us, myself included, and others are no longer part of it, doesn't mean that the show must go on. That's the thing about the event business in general. The show must go on. And the community always is and always will be bigger than any one individual. So I would hope that the people out there recognize the big picture of what the purpose of the mission was to serve and help others with business application adoption. And if that's happening with dynamic communities, fantastic. I think it's wonderful. If it's happening with Dynamics Con, fantastic. If it's happening at 365 Saturday events, fantastic. Whatever the case may be, I just hope people continue to have faith in the purpose and the mission of what the user group was always intended for, because that's something I'll always believe in, absolutely, because I've
Hmm.
seen it work. And I just hope people pause and give this some time to breathe and let people decide how they want to engage in community in 2021.
Yeah, I've kind of, Gus, I left the user groups to work for a partner that I've known for years. In fact, they came in the space not long after I did. So, and, I've gotten a chance to kind of spread my wings in the partner world and kind of learn that. And they gave me that chance to do that, my learning time. And what I kind of came out with is, you know, I just feel like you kind of got to trust where you're investing your time. I mean, from a partner standpoint, when you're allowing your team to give of their time, that that's not billable. That it's a community effort, and so for me, I want to know it's going to a good place. So what we chose to do is to just keep doing community, but to do it in our way up and until we see.
Right.
What's going on. So I think that that's what you're going to find people doing. If community is near and dear to your heart, you're going to figure out a way to do it, no matter who that's with or whatever. So it can still be with the user groups. It could still be with DynCon, like Tony was saying. It could be your own gig. It could be under Microsoft. Whatever. Microsoft has their own community too. I mean, let's not
That's right.
forget that they are clearly. I mean, there's a reason they're hosting it. So there's a message there. So, and, that's what I would say. There's a reason you do what you do. And if you do it simply for solid leads, then you're going to go wherever that payoff is. And then, you figure that out, whatever your payoff is. But if you're doing community because you have some experts, you just want to kind of spread the love, then I feel like you're going to figure out how to do that. So,
Makes sense.
yeah.
Last question, I promise. For organizations out there like Dynamics Con and perhaps even the Scottish Summit, what would you recommend that they kind of focus? I think we've talked about what they should focus on for the whole interview, but what are some of the things that you would say stay away from if they want to succeed and grow?
Oh, you mean from like a community event perspective? Like what should they stay away from?
I mean, you guys worked for an organization that grew over time based on the community. So I assume these organizations want to do the same and continue to prosper. So what would you say? Just keep an eye on this because it could break the foundation. I guess I don't know.
Well,
Well,
my big thing is probably saying continue to get the user voice involved. If you really want to embrace the community and the customer voice, you got to figure out how to include more of them in your content. I see what some people are doing. It's really just friends tapping friends on shoulders, and it's a popularity vote contest for this session or that session. And although there's a lot of great speakers, and that is a good, you'll still get great content that way. It takes work. It takes work to actually uncover and break up sod and find the next Britta Rekstead or the Zaracam Rudin or the next administrator that's hiding somewhere out there that's a tremendous asset to helping others learn more on these applications. And you got to go look for them. You got to search for them, and you got to encourage customers to share their story and share that insight, because I think that is what ultimately will differentiate a true community event versus more of a technology speaking popularity contest where people are just kind of sharing great stuff with one another and all of that. And that's my personal opinion on that. And I thought that's something that we had always done a good job at in the user group side, because you always want the great speakers and the highlight people. And Gus, you're one of them, to be completely transparent. But you want those user voices involved that really make your event more well-rounded in the big picture.
yeah, I would say, look to be asked. Look to be asked to be on committees. Look to have an avenue for your voice, and then that will tell you, and it'll point in the direction of what Tony's saying, and that you're with a group that's really trying to that has a vested interest in your growth. I think the whole model of is it who is it run by, and will you have marketing emails sent to you? I mean, I think we're all in a day that we know, you're going to get that. So it's just seeing past where you're getting the value, if you have to pay for that, and if it's worth it. And then if they're giving you all the things that you need to be successful. So path to Microsoft, some learning, all that great stuff.
And my other advice, Gus, for all the Dynamics customers out there, if anybody is paying attention, I hope they are. Gus, your podcast is getting a lot of views these days.
Thank you.
And I work for Microsoft now, and I'm on the Azure customer success team. I would urge every customer out there to really focus on biz apps. And if you have IT talent, if you have developers or administrators on site and other things that could help you get the most out of your business application use, do it. And what that means is get away from storage, get away from doing virtual machines and managing security and SQL on premise. Get all those things into Microsoft Azure and get them into a cloud availability so that you can focus on the business apps that manage your customer data and allow you to do more with your customers. So it's kind of a everyone wins scenario if you really think about it, because that's where the true value really happens for customers, is on the biz app side. Managing storage and databases and all that stuff, let Microsoft help you with that with Azure. And that's my shameless plug for my Azure buddies.
Good elevator pitch, Stein.
There you go.
There's no free lunch with you.
I know it.
That's
All
Darn
right.
it.
All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Hopefully we brought some clarity again about the questions that most people were wondering about DCI in the future and what happened and all of that. I really appreciate your experience and your honesty whenever you could give it, I guess. Hopefully you can be back on the show someday, and we'll see what happens with DCI. But for now, thank you so much for joining. And how can people get a hold of you or follow you and see what you're doing? I know, Tony, customer success, it's always important. So how can people, I don't know, follow what you're doing now after DCI?
Oh, I don't know. Just search me up on LinkedIn. Tony Stein on LinkedIn. You'll find me out there. And I'm doing stuff on the Azure side with Microsoft now. So I'm drinking different parts of the Microsoft Kool-Aid and learning a lot of
Nice.
different things on the infrastructure that I never knew before. And I didn't know there's like 240 plus services in the Azure stack. There's so many things out there that can happen in the cloud for a customer. It's overwhelming, but it's fun to keep learning, right? There's always more to learn.
Yep.
Absolutely. And Heather?
I am at Ellipse Solution, and you can find us on LinkedIn, or myself on LinkedIn, Twitter, DCI_Heather. Or actually, no, I changed that. That's right. Dying Tat Heather. Oh, look at that. Old things, old habits die hard.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're doing some fun stuff, so definitely follow us. They allow us to be creative. We got a song out there and some YouTube stuff, and so yeah, go check it out. It's community on a different scale.
Awesome. And thank you everyone for joining me on the show today. If you have any questions or comments for Heather or Tony, feel free to email us info@crmmvppodcast.com. I hope you enjoy the show, and we'll see you on the next one.